Welcome to the latest edition of solving 18-year-old Wayland problems because nobody considered really important real-world use cases back in the original protocol set. On today's edition, we have, and this is not a joke, primary outputs. This was opened by Xavier Hugel of the KDE project about a year ago. And it's for more than just primary outputs, output selection in general, but for games especially, primary outputs are pretty important. Game toolkits like SDL are in a bit of a difficult situation when it comes to selecting the output to place a full-screen game on. The current way this works is pretty much SDL exposes a list of outputs, the game moves its window to the output it wants to be full screen on, the game sets its window to be full screen on the screen it's on Wayland, SDL just picks the screen the game would have been on if the application could place its window. There's roughly 3 cases. The game just picks the first output in the list. That's effectively what all games do. The game has a selector for the screen to place the window on in its settings. The game developer sets a specific screen to put the game on, so it gets placed on a specific screen during development. Now, here's where the problem happens. In order to make the most prevalent case work, at least somewhat well, SDL sorts the list of outputs so that the primary screen is in the first place on Windows and X11. On Wayland, it doesn't get this information. Now, the major desktops on Wayland do have a way of setting a primary display. They all have a way of setting a primary display, a different way of doing so, and a different way to share that information. Obviously, that's not good. Window placement shouldn't happen based on any desktop environment protocol, which in the case of Plasma is about the placement of panels, never apps, and definitely not based on the randomish order of globals either. The only feasible way I see to have these existing games be placed how our users expect it would be to have some protocol for the compositor to tell SDL and similar game toolkits about an output it would prefer the game to launch on. Effectively, a racy version of XDG top-level.set full screen. Does anyone have any thoughts or immediate rejections for this before I write an actual protocol proposal? So there's not actually a protocol that exists here. It's more of a, is this a good idea to even make the protocol? And in the most Wayland disagreement you will ever see, the very first comment, do you have any examples of such games? I don't really understand the question. This affects all games that use SDL. I've never seen a game try to full screen itself on anything but its current display. I looked at Baldur's Gate 3, Celeste, Counter-Strike 2, Elden Ring, Hollow Knight, Outer Wilds, and they do not appear to allow the user to select a display. This is about Wayland native games, not X-Wayland, where SDL checks the primary output, which many compositors set to make the game behave at least somewhat sanely. Half the games you list even run through Wine, which does something similar. Do you have any examples of such games? Do you have any examples? Literally every single one of them using SDL. But do you have any examples? Sorry, I just have to do it. Do you have any examples of such games? I don't really understand the question. This affects all games that use SDL. Do you have any examples of such games? All SDL games with the upcoming SDL 3, where Wayland support will be enabled by default, by extension, also all SDL 2 games when the compatibility layer to run it on SDL 3 is used. I think I'm not saying clearly what I mean. I'm asking if there are many games out right now that have this kind of functionality, e.g. on Windows, so I can better understand the context. All SDL games pick a screen to be full screen on. It's not an optional thing in the API. You just pick the 3 games in my Steam library I played last, Counter-Strike 2, No Man's Sky, and Spider-Man Miles Morales, all launch on the screen marked as primary by X-Wayland instead of the screen they're launched on. No Man's Sky and Spider-Man also have settings for which screen they should use. Sorry I had to do so, but that was probably really mean, wasn't it? A bit later on, we had a much more mild complaint from Victoria Breckenfield of the Cosmic Project. Can we maybe not name this preferred, but default or something else? After all, the compositor doesn't really prefer apps to be placed there. It's not the preference of the compositor, it's the default location of the window. Yeah, that's a totally fair criticism. For Cosmic, this would expose the focused output, which is not optimal given we want to avoid applications inferring focus and building hacky workarounds with that information. I feel like this might just be enough information to give some application developers some weird ideas. If you provide any outlets for developers to try weird things, they are going to try them. Trying to stop developers doing stupid things is never going to end. To which Saver says, apps doing stupid things with this is my #1 concern as well, but as long as this is tied to a Surface/XGG top level and specifically about games, I think it should be relatively safe. Never make predictions like this. We also have Simon Sir of the WL Roots project. Could SDL expose a fake preferred output that doesn't really exist, appears first in the list, and results in a set full screen request with a null output? That's an interesting idea, as many games are really dumb about outputs and full screen modes. I'm not sure if they would break some of them though, because you can't expose the correct modes right away. David Emerson comes in with a very good point. Then you have an app that lists screens and is trying to put things explicitly across multiple screens, and now that goes wrong. So if you're trying to play a racing game that is using multiple screens, this model would probably just break. And like so many other protocol discussions, it goes on for a few more comments, and then it basically just dies. It dies until someone has a really important use case which revives the discussion and creates a giant thread. I believe I've done at least one video on it, but Wine is working on a native Wayland driver. It is now enabled in the Wine build by default, but it's not being used by default. But people who are going and testing it, they're running into problems. Wine Wayland window opens on monitor 1 and cannot be moved. This is not the first report of this. There is another one right over here. They actually linked the duplicate as the bug it was on. Display enumeration differs from Wine X11. Because this isn't just an SDL bug. This is also a bug that is going to affect every single game running through Wine. Now, Steam is currently not using the Wine Wayland driver by default. Eventually they will be. When that happens, every single Steam game is going to be affected by this problem. The primary issue is that a game goes to the secondary monitor because Wine Wayland has no way to determine what monitor is primary, so it selects the first reported WL output. Well, at least SDL does. Wine Wayland currently sorts monitors from left to right, but I think it will be changed in the future to match SDL behavior. So right now, it's actually different behavior whether it's SDL or Wine. And in my case, that is entirely broken because my leftmost monitor, that's a vertical monitor. That's not my main monitor. That only works in the case of one monitor. Yeah, basically that only works in the case of a single monitor. First reported W output doesn't represent primary monitor. On Kwin Wayland, the order of reported W outputs matches the order of physical connectors on the GPU. Other compositors, though, might have different logic for WO output order, but there's no guarantee the first WO output would be the same screen. GNOME and KDE have concept of a primary screen, but there's no Wayland protocol to expose that to clients. So different compositors may also order them differently, meaning that different environments are going to have different bugs for the same game. For something that's not even related to the game. But don't forget that this is Wayland. So instead of focusing on real world use cases and real problems that exist, we deflect it and talk about things that don't matter. If SDL does select one of the monitors in this way, then advertises it to applications as the primary monitor, and that causes applications to misbehave, then that is an SDL bug. It cannot be a compositor bug because the compositor does not claim that any monitor is primary. It cannot be an application bug because it just listens to what SDL tells it. Okay, yes, if you want to be pedantic, technically, it's not a bug. What it is a missing feature. The reality is that there's a ginormous catalog of clients that expect to be given a primary display. Do you think that should be handled by a Wayland protocol instead of a third party like Wine or each desktop environment? This is your big mistake in Wayland. Never mention that there are other platforms that do things in a sensible way. Bad idea, because then people just focus on that. Going on further to say, please understand that many of these games are abandonware at this point, and the ones that aren't won't be getting new features to appease their relatively tiny Linux audience. I still don't understand why you'd want to handle this anywhere other than the compositor. This is something I think Wayland developers need to come to terms with. Linux is the smallest platform. Like, this is not the major platform, and you don't get to dictate what developers on other platforms do. If you want things to work on Linux, you need to work with what other people are doing. Even if that's not the right way to do it, that's not the optimal way to do it. If you want things to work, you kind of have to play ball. I'm saying that applications should never tell the compositor how to position them. Instead, they should tell the compositor what they are, a game, so the compositor can make an intelligent decision about how to position them. In the example above, the user might want to configure the compositor to put all full-screen games on their TV. Yes, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't have a way to report the default primary output, and better yet, you could even have it so you set everything that is a game to be on that output, but you need to make sure the information gets to the game. And a bit later on, we have Rygaard join the discussion, friend of the channel and Linux developer on Factorio. From Factorio's point of view, users expect a game to launch in full screen on their primary display. This is simply a fact, and no amount of arguing about whether or not primary display makes sense in Wayland will change that. Right now, what is considered as primary display is undefined on Wayland, which leads to a bad user experience because the game will randomly change which display it launches on. We have received bug reports from Wayland users about inconsistent window positioning, which is great. We love it. SDL2 does not have a function to query the primary display, so we either use the first one returned arbitrary on Wayland, or the one at 00, which is incorrect in my setup because my primary display is on the right. Again, in my case, my primary display is my middle one, my left-hand one is vertical. SDL3 has some smarter heuristics, including querying dbus for GNOME's primary display, but this does not work on all compositors. Notably, it does not work on anything that is not GNOME, which is also great. This is a well-reasoned explanation from an actual developer on a real game that exists and has a native Linux version. So, what do you think happens from here? Everyone's favorite person in the Wayland protocol discussions. You don't get to speak for all users. In fact, Wayland was designed to give the compositor and thus user control over this, not the application. You want to take away the user's control by forcing the window management behavior to conform to what you want, not what any particular user wants. Stating things as fact, which are in fact not facts, is not going to get you anywhere. Which is an absolutely crazy accusation, and nobody is suggesting that. In fact, you could even expose the setting the user makes to the game. That's what's being suggested with the protocol. You want to take control away from the users. You don't want users to have the ability to let their game control where the window is going to be placed. See how easy this logic can be flipped? A statement like this does absolutely nothing productive. Rygaard further explains, Factorio is a native Linux and native Wayland game, so I'm willing to conform to some Wayland behaviors. In this case, by removing our in-game display selection feature, we also natively support window resizing, and our UI is fairly responsive to this. However, the vast majority of games are Windows games running via Proton, so these games do not take into account the Wayland way of things whatsoever. They expect to be able to query the primary display before startup to set the resolution and aspect ratio, but we don't have that concept, so it leads to undesirable behavior. My main point of confusion is why not have this in Wayland? I cannot think of any situation where a compositor would not benefit from being able to specify a primary display. Even in esoteric cases such as VR, it would be beneficial for the compositor to set the VR display as the primary, so that games don't think they're being launched on a separate 2D monitor the compositor might have connected at the same time. Yeah. Do I need to say more? Let's jump to a different discussion by Super. I wouldn't say that apps that run perfectly well through Wayland suddenly breaking by limiting their render resolution to that of a random display because of a missing feature is working as intended. Just to clarify, do you have any reason for why this shouldn't be added for compatibility? Again, our favorite person, applications being broken and not conforming to what Wayland requires isn't an issue with Wayland, it's an issue with applications. Let me rephrase that. Wayland works well and as designed. No one's arguing it's working as designed. It's just designed wrong. That's why there is a protocol discussion happening to add a new protocol. I don't want to be mean to anyone, but I don't understand how this kind of discussion helps the project in any way. How does sticking your head in the sand, ignoring a real problem, ignoring a real use case, because Wayland is perfect as it is, deal with anything, right? This doesn't solve any problems. It's one thing to have issues with the direction things are going, but to just put your head in the sand and pretend like there is no problem. Why are you doing this? Straight up, why are you doing this? Do you have any reason for why this shouldn't be added for compatibility? It doesn't solve the issue. Yes, it does. You can work around this in the compatibility layer to some degree. Yes, whilst we're actually doing things through Wayland, yes, but when we move to Wayland, no. It takes control away from the users. No, it doesn't. It doesn't whatsoever. Back to Rygaard, I fundamentally disagree with this ideology. This statement can be true for games that natively support Wayland, but we are talking about wine-based games. They expect things to work the Windows way, which Wayland is fundamentally incompatible with. By standardizing a feature that the big three desktop environments already implement anyway, it will encourage all compositors to implement this behavior to give a more consistent user experience and fix the fundamental issue we are facing with these games, which by their nature will not make changes to conform to the behavior of a platform that they don't even support in the first place. If you want it to be any clearer, something that never was can't be broken. Man. I don't know how anyone manages to work in this repo when you have to deal with bullshit like this. And as this kept going in a circle and nothing productive happened, Matthias Klassen jumps in. It's probably time to put this issue to the side for a while. He's not wrong, honestly. He's not wrong, but at the same time, Rygaard wants the problem to be addressed. In that vein, here's an alternative. Wine will determine which output it is opened on and expose that output and that output only to the underlying game, which would break multi-monitor games, but fine. If the game runs on SDL, this would have the effect of SDL get displays only returning that output and SDL get primary display also behaving correctly. This way the user could use a compositor's existing infrastructure, i.e. window rules on Sway, to determine where it goes, leaving the power in the user's hands, which is an absolute hack of a solution, but nothing else is going anywhere. When I planned this video, this comment from Rygaard was the last one on the thread. There has been a couple more after this, but we'll do this one first. After thinking on this for a while, I've come around on some of the arguments and am now of the opinion that this should be handled in the compatibility layer. Some of this will be a repeat of what I already said, but I want it all in one place. I see two main use cases for a client within the compatibility layer. The client uses the primary output to set its internal resolution and perhaps do positioning on Windows. This is a common case for video games. The client wants to know all of your outputs and which one is primary so that it can perform window sizing / positioning logic across all of them. This is a less common use case. To solve case 1, the compatibility layer can use the output that its window is placed on by the compositor and pass only that output to the client. Again, causes issues for multi-screen games. This gives the user full control over the positioning via their compositor and allows problematic game logic to work correctly, as it only sees one output and sets its resolution to that. If the user wants to have the game launch on a certain output, then they use the compositor's configuration to do so, such as Sway's window rules. Obviously, any positioning requests are still ignored. To solve case 2, the compatibility layer can use logic similar to SDL3 to make an educated guess, such as reading GNOME's dbus property and falling back to some positional heuristics, and allow the primary output to be overridden via an environment variable or other configuration method. This gives the user full control over which output is considered primary, and position requests are still ignored and left to the user to handle. Case 1 ought to be solved ASAP and does not require anything from Wayland. Case 2 would be helped by standardizing a primary output, but is certainly not required, as giving the user a way to control it will allow them to coerce problematic clients into behaving correctly. In the case of Proton, Steam could provide a UI in the compatibility settings to select the output that Proton will consider primary on compositors that don't provide this information. Xaver directly replies to that, referring to case 1. If it was that simple, we would have never had any problem. Games create a window after choosing an output. Clients do not know which output a window is on until the window is both created and mapped. This is about making the compositor choose the output before there is a window in the first place, referring to case 2. The point of this is for applications to stop abusing completely unrelated D internal APIs like KDE Output Order v1, which are very much not about positioning windows and which will be locked down to avoid that nonsense. Solutions for backwards compatibility do not need to be magically perfect. They just need to be good enough. If you think your compositor's users need a setting for which output to choose for such backwards compatibility measures, then just go ahead and do that instead. And the rest of the comments aren't really saying anything we haven't seen already. So this is a problem that we're going to see solved probably in a good year or 2 from now, maybe 5 years, hopefully not that long. Wayland never ceases to amaze me, man. Every time I do one of these videos, it makes me lose more and more hope in the project. Like, Wayland is the future, right? But at the same time, holy shit. Honestly, what I think should happen here, and I would not be surprised if someone does this, whether it be Xaver or someone from WR Roots or something like that, go actually make the protocol. So just do it, right? Make sure there's an implementation being made over in WR Roots, over in Cosmic, over maybe in Mir, over in KDE. Have everything done, and then it doesn't matter what anyone from GNOME says, you just push it into the project. Because with those people, you have enough to do so, and then you just say, okay, well, if GNOME doesn't want to have games working properly, who cares? It would absolutely not be the first time I've seen that done. With there being a lot of Wayland environments within the Wayland protocol discussion, you can push stuff like that through with a little bit of effort. But what do you think? Wayland, man. Just Wayland. That's all I have to say. If you like the video, go like the video. If you like the video, all that fun stuff, you want to become one of these amazing people over here, Patreon, Scribes, Dudley, Parapay, linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me. Honestly, I just feel defeated sometimes. Bye.